Hey Matt, we are recording in live. Thanks for talking to my class in the internet about the IT industry, specifically being a Ranken alumni. Um, and you've been out in the industry for what you graduated back in
2011.
2011.
Mhm.
So you've got a fair amount of industry experience. So really appreciate you taking the time. If you wouldn't mind, and I could introduce you, but clearly you can introduce yourself better. Just kind of introducing yourself to the world.
Sure. My name is Matt Keehner. I started building websites in 1999. I started doing it professionally in about 2011. I have worked in the industry for about 13 years. And in that time, have been a developer, a tech lead, a director of technology, a front end lead. I've been kind of all over the place.
So that's an impressive resume. So walk me through your careers. I mean, how many jobs have you had, and kind of what does that look like?
So I got my start actually. I worked at Ranken for a little bit as a tutor while I was there. And then after I got out, I worked at one, two, three, four, five, six different places in that time. On average, I've been at companies for about 2 years. The longest I was at one was almost four, and I've been at my current job for a little over 2 years.
So it just comes to mind, this like old school mentality of having one employer for your whole life versus when I was, a long time ago I read a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, and in Rich Dad
Mhm.
Poor Dad, he really is a advocate of staying with the company, growing your skill set, growing your value, and then you kind of plateau. And so as soon as you
Mhm.
start to hit that plateau, you go to another company, grow your skill set, grow your value, and then and rinse and repeat. And by that, you're going to continually make your value go up and up and up.
Mhm.
And so I kind of, you're not job jumping, to be clear. You
Mhm.
are growing your value. So I kind of see the value in that. So is that your strategy, or just kind of work out like that?
It kind of just broke that way. So you actually got me my first job at the Net Impact, and I was there for uh, almost 2 years, and we did a lot of WordPress work there, or at least that was what I was focused on. And I got involved in the WordPress meetup scene on like meetup.com. And the first one that I actually went to was about a week before the WordPress convention WordCamp.
Yep,
And
yep.
they were asking people for volunteers. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I'll volunteer.
Can I ask, did you meet Alex Miller? Because he like ran that for a while. So I didn't know if you ever came across him or not. He was another grad.
I know Alex, I think he was actually in my graduating class, if I remember
Oh,
correctly.
okay, cool.
But yeah, I don't remember him from the meetups, but I think I remember him from school.
We
Yeah,
hosted
so,
those on Rankin campus for a while before COVID.
oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so through the meetup, I met a couple of guys, and one of those guys actually got me my next job. And so I jumped ship to work for another agency in U City. Um, from there, I was there for about 4 years, and one of the guys that I met there, he had gone to work for a startup, or startup-ish company that was doing software for Greek life. And so they needed a web developer. He put my name out there, and they hired me. After that, I jumped ship to another agency, and I was following somebody that I'd worked with at TNI and Integrity, the company that was in U City. I followed him to that agency, which was HLK. They're like downtown. And then after he left and went to Rawlings, I followed him to Rawlings, and then from there, I made my way to Scrubs and Beyond because I followed a coworker that I worked with at HLK who had gone there. So,
And so Scrubs and Beyond is your current employer.
yep.
And your current job title, or the job title that you had me list, was
Senior application developer.
Senior Application Developer. And so I think it goes, kind of listening to your story, it kind of goes without saying that networking has played a large role in helping you go from company to company. It's who you know almost more than what you know, but obviously clearly a talented developer, otherwise you wouldn't be in the industry for 13 years.
Yeah, no, knowing people and networking has been huge for me. It has, gotten me pretty much every job that I've had, and in the same way, I've gotten a lot of other people jobs along the way. Definitely like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, well, very cool. So, what are the primary languages that you use on the day to day?
So right now, the company that I work for has a Magento storefront, and so I'm on like the e-commerce team working on that. So a lot of PHP, CSS, and then the less preprocessor, HTML, and JavaScript on the front end.
Cool.
And the JavaScript that we do is Knockout.js. That's the framework that Magento uses. But then we've also built a number of applications using Vue that I work on quite a bit.
Nice, nice. So yeah, Rankin's curriculum has morphed over the years. We don't focus on PHP as much currently, but we do hit a lot of JavaScript, and so because there's so much out there in the JavaScript world, we do focus on React is our library of choice for our curriculum, but yeah, you do Vue, and that's I guess you would say a competitor out there. So well, cool, very very cool. So you mentioned you started building websites in 1999, so I find that pretty awesome.
I did.
So was it like a hobby as a kid for you, or what's that?
Yeah, it was just something that I did as a hobby. I was about 11 years old whenever I started that, and I was basically building, fan sites for things. I was really into like Dragon Ball Z at the time, and I built a fan site for that. I was really into like Gundam Wing at the time. I built one for that. And then it was just like other creative endeavors. I used to make custom items for The Sims, and so I made myself a little web page for that. I used to make custom wrestlers in a game called Fire Pro Wrestling, and so I made a website for those too. It was just like a lot of little creative personal projects.
So it's pretty obvious why you chose this industry, and that it was already your hobby slash passion of doing this. So that's that's my next question: is why'd you choose the industry? Well, that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, definitely. It was just something that I'd already been doing for quite a while, and something that I enjoy doing.
So I'm going to take a wild guess with the background being blurred. You're working from home.
Yeah, yeah. I've been working from home for since the pandemic hit, like March 2020.
Nice.
The company that I actually work for right now, we got bought out about halfway through last year by like a VC-backed company, and they actually closed our St. Louis office down entirely and transitioned the whole company to being fully remote. The team that I'm on, though, has been remote since I started. I'm the only developer in the general St. Louis area. We've got guys in Pennsylvania, up in Rockford, Illinois, a couple of guys from Brazil, and then we also have a team in India.
Well, that's interesting. So how many people used to be in St. Louis? Or I guess this was all before COVID. So you just basically always been remote.
Yeah, I've always pretty much been remote. I've been into the office a few times. Like they would occasionally bring like all the remote guys into St. Louis for a couple of days, and we'd have some like high level meetings and stuff like that. But yeah, for the most part, I've been remote since COVID hit.
So walk us through, because I tell you what, I guarantee of the class full of students I have, many of them are looking at you going, well, that seems awesome. I want to work remote. I want to work from home. That's my end goal. So how do they get there? How do they get from, first semester student to full-time work from home status?
That's a good question. This actually isn't my first time working from home. One of the startups that I worked for, or the startup that I worked for, they were based out of Indianapolis, and so that was actually my first remote job. And that was years before the pandemic. That was like 2017. I think right now, something like work from home is sort of just kind of an almost industry standard perk. Like if you're looking on LinkedIn or Indeed or any of those, you're going to see quite a few remote positions on there. So I think at the moment, yeah, it's just kind of an industry standard perk for sure.
have you, throughout your career, have you played a role in hiring developers along the way?
A couple of times, yeah. I've been promoted into like tech lead positions and like tech director positions and stuff like that, and so I have had some responsibility in hiring. I haven't. I think only like one time I was like sort of the final say, but a lot of times, it's sort of a group consensus.
Yeah. Well, the reason I ask is because, a lot of these folks coming out of school, their first job is going to maybe be remote, maybe be in person. What would you
Mhm.
recommend for your first, like, this is my first real job, as a developer? Would you recommend remote or would you recommend in person?
That's a good question. It's really hard to say because, when I was a new developer, it was only in person. So
Yeah.
that's really the only experience I've had. I think that being in person, it's a trade-off. I think being in person definitely has some advantages. Just being able to like wheel over to another developer's desk and have a quick chat about a problem.
Yeah.
Being able to like brainstorm ideas, bounce ideas off each other,
Yeah.
like the rubber duck debugging theory.
I told you guys about
Just
rubber duck debugging. Come on.
A lot of
Okay,
people,
one person you
I
shake their
think a
head,
lot
yes.
of us know it.
Yeah. Okay, right on. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Those kind of things are quite a bit easier to do in person. Whereas, when you're remote, everybody's sort of asynchronous. So
Yeah.
if you are stuck on something and you really need help at that moment, the other people might have gone to lunch. They might not be working the same schedule that you are. And so, lining those up can be a bit of a challenge. And, Zoom calls and, Slack huddles and stuff like that just really aren't always the best substitute for just like an in-person conversation.
No doubt.
Um,
Yeah. Very cool. So, walk us through what's it like to be in your shoes? What's a 9 to 5? What's a day in your shoes like?
so usually, I get up around about 20 minutes or so before I'm like going to clock on. We have a stand-up call at 9 a.m. every morning, and we just sort of go through, what we did yesterday,
Do you get to
what
sleep till
where
8:30, 8:40?
Yeah, I mean, my commute, is just from bedroom to the office, so it's one of those things. Get up, make some coffee, um, play Wordle, check my email, just get prepped, just get prepped for the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do a stand up, what I worked on yesterday, what I'm planning to work on today, any blockers, anything that I need help with, any call outs, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That usually lasts, 15 to 30 minutes, just depending on how off topic we get. And then after that, yeah, I just jump into tickets. We use Jira as our ticketing system. So we do like 2 or 3 week long sprints, kind of depending on what our workload looks like, what kind of, goals we're trying to hit. I'll work on tickets. I do pull request reviews usually pretty early in the morning. So, like I mentioned, we have like an India team, so their schedule is almost opposite from ours. They're clocking off as we're clocking on, and so a lot of times I run through like the PRs that they've put in, review those, make suggestions, or approve and merge into the main branch. And then yeah, I work for a while. Usually go make a sandwich or something around noon, jump back in after that, and I'm usually off by about 5:30.
And so I'm trying to summarize. You're starting your day at 9 ish and off about 5:30 ish. If you get
Yeah.
a standard workload, and how many of those hours are you writing code versus how many are you in meetings or just emails and that kind of stuff?
I'm actually pretty fortunate that I don't have to deal with a ton of meetings or a ton of emails. Um, Most of our communication is on Slack. I would say that on an average week, outside of stand-ups, we have a couple of calls with different vendors. Every couple weeks, we'll have like a sprint planning meeting or a sprint review meeting, that kind of thing. So I think at most I'm in meetings 2 or 3 hours. Like that's a pretty rough day for me as far as meetings go.
Yeah.
But on average, 15 minutes to maybe an hour.
Nice.
And yeah, emails is kind of the same way. I don't get a ton of emails. Slack chats and stuff like that, usually maybe like half hour.
So the bulk is in code review.
Hmm. Yeah, code review usually takes me, depending on how much work got done and how like intricate that is. I've had days where I spend 6 hours on code review just because it's a big pull request or there's a lot of changes, things like that. And
Yeah.
I've had other days where, 10 or 15 minutes.
What advice would you give to students coming out of Rankin to help them get that first job? Because really, it's once you get that first job and you get that 1 to 3 years experience, and you're not terrible, your career will bloom. So the
Mhm.
hardest part is literally finding that first job. So what advice would you give to getting your foot in the door?
Get you to get them that first job.
No, there's too many of them.
Yeah. No, that, it's kind of hard because that's actually how I got my first job was you recommended me for the position. And so I think it's one of those things where if you can meet other developers, and find somebody that can help you get your foot in the door, that would be huge. Otherwise, I would definitely say, build some stuff and kind of set up like a portfolio, if you can. And then that way you actually do have some work to show. If you don't want to set up a portfolio, have a decent looking GitHub profile. Try and get involved in maybe like the open source community or, hit up a meetup or an in-person programming thing and just try and network with people. Because like I said, networking has been huge for me. That's how I've gotten pretty much all of my jobs in my career.
Yeah.
And so definitely network.
Yeah, great answer. It kind of just goes back to the classic. It's about who you know, not what you know. Obviously,
Mhm.
you got to know what you need to know, but it's about who you know, right?
Exactly. And, it's one of those things you definitely need to know the things too, because that's what's going to get people to recommend you for something. Being able to prove that you have the chops for it, that's what's going to get people to actually recommend you and put their name out, put their rep out, and say, hey, this guy's good, and actually give you that recommendation.
I don't remember if this was during the recording or not, but you mentioned meetup.com.
Hmm.
What is meetup.com and what can you do there?
I'm not sure if I think it's still around, but basically what it is people can, create like a weekly or monthly meetup session and, just like invite people to it. And at one point, St. Louis had quite a few. There was like a WordPress one, a JavaScript one. There was stuff for like other different programming languages, different, server type stuff, databases. Like there were all kinds of small meetups like that.
Yeah.
And they usually just, they find a venue like, either like a school classroom. Some of them would meet up at like a bar or something like that. And they just kind of get together, talk shop. A lot of times someone will do a presentation on a particular topic. I've actually done, I did a few of those when I was bigger into the WordPress meetup scene, just like small 15, 20-minute presentations, Q&As, that kind of thing. And you just kind of, help other developers out with stuff that you know.
So it's something that I can always encourage my students to do is go up on meetup.com and search for your language of choice and see if there's a small you might meet at a Starbucks.
Hmm.
And it's like, hey, I'm looking to learn more about JavaScript, and guess what? Here's 10 developers who are in the real world working with JavaScript on a daily basis who are there to build the community and help people like yourselves, right? So that's just a really good resource. I wanted to ask Matt about and kind of highlight that because, again, we're on the topic of networking, and that's how you do that. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, that's definitely because depending on how big the company that you go to work for is, your dev team could be 2 or 3 people, or it could be 100 people. It just kind of depends on the kind of company that you're working for. And so those kind of meetups are a way to kind of branch out a little bit and find developers that you otherwise wouldn't have met, and they might get you jobs that you otherwise wouldn't have known about.
Exactly. Yeah. So you've been doing this now for a long time.
Mhm.
You got into this in 1999. So do you see this as a lifelong career, or do you see a pivot like off in the future, 10, 20 years? Or are you just going to ride into the sunset?
I think ideally I would actually want to pivot off into something else at some point. Um, it's one of those things, being on a computer all day, isn't always the healthiest thing. And so I think it would be interesting to do something else at some point. But I think my biggest hang up with that would be getting to the point where I'm making as much as I am now would be, like starting over from scratch would be something that I'm not super interested in.
Right.
So I definitely think I'm here, at least for the moment. But I would like to, at some point, transition into another field if I could.
Yeah, very cool. You got an entrepreneurial spirit, maybe.
Maybe not so much that, but so like one of the things that when the pandemic hit, I bought a 3D printer and I started like teaching myself CAD modeling. And that really scratched the same creative itch that I had when I first started building websites. Because there's definitely it's a different world when you're building websites for yourself and when you're building stuff for other people. You don't always get to do the thing that you want to do whenever a client says, we need this, we've got this design, or we're working on this project. And so like teaching myself CAD modeling was a lot of fun. And, like whenever I was in college, I actually went to SIUE for a year before I started at Ranken. And I was really on the fence whether I was going to go into like an engineering field or if I was going to go into a computer science field. And so I think getting an engineering job would actually be pretty interesting as well.
Yeah.
I just like to build stuff, even, real stuff, internet stuff. I just really enjoy building things.
Yeah. No, I agree. One of my close friends is an engineer, and our brains just work in the same manner. So I understand that. Well, very cool, man. Hey, I just want to, well, first off, again, thank you for taking the time for talking to my students. And, you reached out to me today, which was a little unexpected, so much appreciated. And, thank you. And also say, congratulations on a career of success and, something I think that all my students could aspire to become, is having a, healthy, long career in this industry. I'd like to open it up to the class if anyone has any questions for Matt about his 13 years or anything specific. Now's the time to do so. Yes, sir?
Do you prefer doing more of the front end or the back end side?
Do you have a preference, front end or back end code?
I think my preference is probably doing back end work just because it's the area that I have the least amount of experience. And so I'm discovering new things and learning new things, and I'm really challenged when I'm doing that kind of thing. But in my day-to-day, I find myself writing more front-end code, or even kind of in a full stack position. I've also heard it called like the back of the front end, where I'm sort of integrating APIs and building applications, and not so much, the HTML, CSS styling part.
Interesting. Cool. Other questions? You had a question here? Yeah.
Yeah. So, what exactly is the business that you work for? Wasn't it called Scrub something?
Scrubs and Beyond. Could you tell us a little bit more about that company?
Sure. So Scrubs and Beyond they have a bunch of retail stores. I'm on the e-commerce team, but we sell scrubs for like nurses, doctors, things like that. Our parent company, KindThread, has a few other brands that are mostly in the medical apparel, but then we also have a company called Chefware that makes like uniforms for people that work in kitchens. So I don't really interface too much with that day-to-day kind of stuff. Being on the e-com team, I'm more working on the website, building features for that. So I'm a little bit abstracted from the business's primary goal.
So it just brings a question to my mind, so you've built these websites over time. Like, do you have any projects that have been like standout projects? Like, hey, high volume, if you've ever used this website, this is code I worked on. Or do you just have any projects you enjoyed working on?
My favorite project was definitely when I was at Integrity, when the pageant was putting in a new venue next to him, Del Mar Hall. They wanted to redo those websites, and I got the opportunity to work on those. And fun. One of the things that I built was like their event calendar. They don't have the website that I built anymore. They have since redesigned it again, but I think some of my code might still live in that event calendar.
That's cool. Have you done any high volume stuff like, so many transactions per month or something like that?
No, not directly. Okay. That's just not really where I've landed.
Sure, got it. Other questions for Matt? Yes.
When working on his portfolio, where did you get your inspiration from?
When working on a portfolio, where do you get your inspiration from?
That's a good question. There used to be a site like Dribble or CodePen, some of the little snippet sharing sites. It's definitely finding things like finding websites that you find aesthetically pleasing, and then, you know, inspecting the source, kind of tearing them apart, figure out how it was built, rebuild it, and then understand, you know, how it got built and why it got built. Because I think that's a big part of it too, is why the decision got made. Yeah, it's really just, you know, kind of scouring the internet for websites that you think look cool, and then kind of copying them a little bit.
I understand and agree. Yeah, it's reverse engineer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for answering all my questions. Thanks for taking the time. I think you answered all my questions very well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, and good to touch base again in a little bit. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
All right, man. Take care.
See ya.
All right, later. Bye.